Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Dirks, and on behalf of ACRL and Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, How Dissertations Inspire Better Research and Learning, Help Researchers Broaden and Deepen Their Sources, which is sponsored by ProQuest. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL and Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. Free to users, the structured 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for interactive discussions of important new issues and developments in academic librarianship by librarians, vendors, authors, and other interested stakeholders. Before we get started, I would just like to point out a few features of the webinar software. In the main area of the screen, you should be able to follow along with the presentation materials. Along the right-hand side, you should see a Q&A panel and a chat panel. If you don't see the chat panel, you can click the button that sort of looks like a dialog cloud along the bottom of your screen, and that should open up the chat for you. Please use the Q&A panel to submit your questions for our speaker today. And at the end of the presentation, you will take a few minutes to answer those questions, so please do send them in throughout. If you're experiencing any technical issues, that's what the chat's for. You can use the chat panel to let me know about them, and I'll troubleshoot the issue with you privately. Today, we're using the hashtag ACRL Choice Webinars during the event. So if you have another screen handy, shout out to us. We're at choice_reviews on Twitter. Also note that we are recording today's program, and everyone who registers should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archived version. And with that, I do believe we are ready to get started. So I will turn the floor over to you, Teresa.
Thank you, Mark. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Teresa Levesque. I am a product marketing manager here at ProQuest, based in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I look after all of our dissertations and theses, programs, and products. And as Mark mentioned, today we're going to talk about how dissertations improve research and learning and how they have a positive impact on teaching and research. We're going to look at the value that this type of content brings to the researcher in the undergraduate and graduate environment in academic libraries. And we're going to look at some examples of how a researcher might use the content and what their workflow might look like as they go through the product. So the biggest thing that dissertations and theses bring, I think that expands how they impact positively outcomes, is the value that they bring. And dissertations are, of course, the culmination of many years of work, a ton of research. They're often the first steps in establishing an academic career, but they're also an important part of scholarly communication for graduate and undergraduate researchers, and it's also important for faculty researchers. They're frequently used and recommended by faculty. In fact, this is something that we've learned after we've done a couple of surveys. We surveyed 2 different times several hundred faculty, and we found when they were looking at content that is not a journal and wanting to encourage their students to expand their resources, as well as looking at their own sources when they do research, we found that 86% of faculty recommend dissertations or theses to their students for research, and that 73% of them, in fact, use dissertations and theses when they're doing their own research. And while they are outside the traditional, published or journal peer-reviewed process, they are evaluated by academic experts, and they provide a lot of benefits that are not found in, your typical academic journal article that researchers may be looking at. And we're going to go to our first and second poll question that Mark is going to put up for us. And we're going to ask, how often do your students access or request access to online dissertations and theses? And we'll give you just a moment to look at that. So why, would we want students to be using dissertations for their research? Again, they're scholarly reviewed work, of course, with comprehensive and original research. Researchers who access them, they can see the latest ideas, cutting-edge research, what are the trends in their subject area, and the format itself, which of course is typically very long, over 150 pages, is going to provide much more detail than an article. You're going to find data sets, methods, long literature reviews, and extensive bibliographies. And researchers can also benefit from seeing what a dissertation looks like. What is the expected style? What is the expected format? What kind of things are the scholars doing when they're doing graduate work? And in some cases, it can provide the only research on niche topics, and it can also spark ideas for future work or future directions that the researcher wants to go when they're doing their work. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the humanities. For the humanities, there's an interesting place that dissertations and theses have for the researcher. A lot of humanities subjects, even the more widely studied ones, don't have the same component of academic journals that a sciences subject may have. So dissertations may be the only place to find research for niche subjects. And for more widely studied subjects, it will be a great place to see what research is going on. And if people want to study notable scholars and see, where did their research journey begin? What were their thoughts? What were they talking about at different points in their careers? And you're also going to find that in the humanities in particular, there are going to be other kinds of files besides a PDF that are part of the dissertation or a thesis that are going to be valuable to researchers. And this is something, of course, that is changing and growing all the time. It could be audio or video performances, interviews, data sets, survey instruments, scanned artwork, 3D scans, and a lot of supplemental information that people can find when they're doing humanities research. So I wanted to take a look at a humanities student and how they might use dissertations in their research. And I'm going to switch over here to take a look at this in action. And the researcher that we're looking at today, let's meet that researcher. This is an upper level undergraduate student who's working on a final paper for their 400 level English class. They are researching the representation of witches and feminism in Elizabethan theater and literature. And this student is also considering graduate school. So they want to take a look at the level of research and writing that's required for dissertations and graduate work, as well as see what students are doing at which universities. They also want to find the recent research. This is a topic that has been around for quite a while, but they want to know what's been the latest scholarship. What can I find that's going to give me some insight into context for what I'm doing? And possibly spark some areas of future interest and ways that they could adjust their own research going forward. So starting, it's just a simple keyword search for the keywords that the student is working on, in this case, witches and feminism in Elizabethan theater. And you can see the search results, and this is in the ProQuest platform with many databases. And to get to the parameters that the researcher wants, you can go and look for full text only, as well as go look at the last 5 years. And then the researcher sees that the most relevant dissertation or most relevant result is a dissertation. So this will be a great place to look to get that more detailed information, to get that snapshot of what is the latest research about the topic. And you can see the full text is available for download. It was fully indexed during the search, as well as including the bibliography and the table of contents. So that helped surface this dissertation as a great resource for this user. There are many shared resources and documents that they can look at and jump over to. Here are some related sources that they can look at. They can also look at the indexing terms that are used as this dissertation was indexed and the metadata was created. And then to explore the latest research, the researcher can go down to the literature review, which is going to, present that summary of what's been happening in that area of scholarship, give a survey of the state of the topic over time. And again, it's here. They can download it. They can read through it, see some of the things, the most recent scholarship, what that indicates, how that's going to be useful to them. And the researcher reads that, wants to continue pursuing this topic. And then you can look at the references for this particular dissertation. This can be another great resource for a researcher. There will be links to other sources that were in the dissertation. For example, there are books. There are some scholarly articles. Here's something from Shakespeare Quarterly. You will also find bibliographical information for the source material, for example, a Shakespearean play here. And they can go through all of that, find some resources that will help them, and find related content that's going to help expand their search. It's also a great jumping off point for particular research if they want to go forward in their academic careers. And now it's time to go over to our next poll. Curious about the number of undergraduates at your institution who might be doing advanced research projects or might not. Has it changed in the last 5 years? We hear from librarians, we hear from faculty that say, yes, we do have more people doing something like a senior thesis or some kind of other advanced research project. So it's interesting to know how that has turned out. Now, when we're looking at the sciences, there are definitely some similarities in the value of dissertations to the researcher. Again, you'll have the detailed list of references, bibliography, related articles. In the sciences, it's the detail that's inside the dissertation that's of particular value. Because in a journal article that was begun as a dissertation, obviously it's much shorter, and in the dissertation you're going to find detailed data sets, including negative results. You will likely find detailed descriptions of the methodology, of what it went into the dissertation, the field work, a lot of graphs and charts, the discussion of how it turned out, the results, and an overview frequently of what led the researcher to go down this path. And in answer to the poll question we just asked a moment ago about the number of undergraduate projects, definitely an increase of about 49% of the respondents. So this use case for a sciences student is specific, and this would be a student that we're going to meet here, this researcher. This is someone who's in the early stages of their graduate career, and they already have a topic that they're working on. They're researching the effects of environmental toxins on birds of prey in the United States. They want to understand the recent research, what has been happening in that field, and they also need to see an in-depth example of field research methods, how data is modeled, how that builds on the previous research that's been done in the field. The person's professor has recommended a relevant journal article for this graduate student, and the graduate student has read that article, and it's based on the primary author's dissertation research. And so the graduate student here, you'll see some screen captures, read the article, goes and looks for the author and finds the author, and then gets the dissertation. And again, they're going to be able to look and see what happened during that research process, what led to that article, and get the details. There's the size difference that we've talked about a lot, but what's really interesting is each chapter has the details about the research that was published. Why did they do it? What were the methods? What were the results? How did they do the data modeling? How did they do the field work? How did they treat the laboratory information? And it also has an introductory story about the research subject and how the researcher came to that subject. Another thing that you can find in a sciences dissertation that's going to be different from a published article is, in this case, there's a whole other area that was included in the dissertation. So, for example, you'll see at the bottom in Chapter 4, the the author had also researched the effects of pharmaceuticals in these birds, which was something that was not in the journal article. And then, of course, you'll get a different summary that includes an overall look at the tools, at the findings, and what they'll do going forward. And again, if the author goes and the researcher, goes and looks at the references, you're going to find a lot of additional sources. There are other publications by the dissertation and journal article author. There's government and nonprofit documents. There are books. There are papers from scientific societies that give some ideas about how the same type of research was conducted in other environments. Now we have another poll question. And this is asking where researchers go to discover primary research. And primary research meaning, dissertations, thesis, working papers, where researchers are out there doing the data collection, doing the analysis. And we'll see what people say about that one. I'm going to talk a little bit about where I was looking and finding those dissertations and doing that research. And that was in ProQuest Dissertation and Theses Global. ProQuest has been doing dissertation work for about 80 years. It was really the start of the company. So collecting, publishing, disseminating, preserving. And we think that ProQuest Dissertations and Theses Global is unique and provides some advantages that other collections aren't able to provide. We have about 5 million graduate works in the database. 2.5 million of those are full text, which is what we looked at before, and those go all the way back to 1734. They're fully searchable, including the bibliographies and the table of contents and all of the document. We have been adding about 200,000 works each year, and we're the official offsite repository for the United States Library of Congress. We have works from more than 3,000 graduate schools and universities from 100 countries. So we think that that's one of the huge benefits of having this aggregated database, where you're going to find research from all over the world and from many other places that you may not find in a repository or a national library. We also have 2.5 million works in the database that are citation only, but they do include the bibliographic data for the work. And we have about 4 million researchers from all around the world that use ProQuest Dissertations and Theses Global. One of the great things about dissertations in general and about PQDT is that we're bringing together work from so many places and regions, and it's going to give coverage across all disciplines, right? There are dissertations and theses that cover any type of subject you could possibly think of, so it'll help everyone at the university. And then this just gives you an idea of the major subject categories that are covered, and they are covered in depth. We have, for example, 2 million dissertations that cover education. When students are looking for dissertations and theses, there are a lot of different places they go, and those are all covered in PQDT Global. Our metadata is given to Google Scholar. All of the major subject indexes like InSpec, PubMed, PsycInfo, and also in our own discovery platforms of Sum and Primo. And I also wanted to take another look at some of the advanced options for advanced researchers. We have a lot of ways that people can look for very specific information within this huge corpus of data. You can search by committee members and advisors. If a student is looking at a particular graduate school or wants to learn about a particular faculty member's work. They can also look at citations. So if there's a particular document, they want to know how it's been cited in dissertations, they can search for that. They can also look at a university in particular or a group of universities. They can also look at the country. There's many, many ways they can look at it. And another thing that has been very interesting for researchers is the data itself within all of these dissertations, and the metadata is being used in research projects that look at different things about how research has progressed, what graduate students are studying, what they graduate in. There are also tools available that can help researchers manage their research, properly cite the dissertation if they're using it. You can tag things, you can share them, you can save them, you can make notes on what you're doing. You can see here a little bit of searches that have been saved, and you can go back to your research and keep track of it. There's some additional resources too if you are interested in dissertations. One is about ProQuest Dissertations and Theses Global, which is the database we looked at. Another is if you're interested in publishing your school's graduate works in ProQuest Dissertations and Theses Global, you can do that too. We also have a free online tool for managing the workflow for publishing electronic theses and databases and dissertations. And we also have a digital program where we can preserve and digitize a school's printed older graduate works and include it in the database. And I wanted to look at the last poll question when we were asking researchers where they searched for dissertations or where they were finding them. They said that they go directly, 20% directly to a database, which is very interesting, and then 15% at Google Scholar and 12% in the online catalog. So thank you. Mark, I would like to see if we have any questions.
Absolutely. All right, so we do have a few questions in the queue here.
Wonderful.
I would encourage folks, if you do have questions about theses and dissertations and those sorts of things, pop them in the Q&A box and we will get to as many as we have time for. So we have a question here from Beth Cook that asks about sort of the number of universities that are allowing their dissertations to be published. Have you seen that increasing? Have you seen that decreasing? Are there any trends that go into that? Could you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's a good question. We have seen the trend go very steadily upward. And one of the important things to note is that, of course, many institutions have institutional repositories, and they are putting their own universities' dissertations and theses into those. And that is 100% compatible and supported by ProQuest and PQDT Global. So we always have more universities who want to contribute. We've had a wonderful increase in universities from other parts of the world besides the United States and Canada, in Europe, in India, in China, in the Middle East, who are bringing the content into PQDT Global. So yeah, we have seen an increase, always an increase in universities that want to provide the content.
Okay, great. And we've got a question here, which I'm not entirely certain of the abbreviations that are being used.
Okay.
It came in from Kim, so I may ask you to help me out here. And Kim asks, can you explain why someone would want to search anywhere except full text? And then here's where NOFT, is that no full text? I'm not sure. And document
yes.
text, full text?
Well, I think, no, that's a good question, and we're getting into some specific terminology, and I might even actually switch back over to the database.
Sure.
We do have people who search for all of the content, not just full text, and that could be, somebody who is looking for maybe a historical perspective on a particular topic. For example, if you were looking for dissertations about Shakespeare, and you wanted to see what that body of research looked like, and you may come across something that is not full text, but it may be an important work that you want to find out about. It could just be to see the metadata, who wrote it, where did they come from, when did they write it, but it may also be something that you want to try and access, and I apologize for this. I'm going to switch back here. There we go. And then, for example, if I do that, just do a big search. So you might find, a dissertation that is very old, and it might not be digitized, but it might still be available in the library of the university where it is listed as residing. So you could put in a request for an interlibrary loan or something like that. And then for the other search features that the librarian was asking about, we have some different options. For example, we have anywhere but full text or anywhere except full text, and that lets you look, is my keyword in the title? Is it in the table of contents? Is it in the abstract? Is it in the metadata? Is it in the references? So that it would indicate that the keyword is of more importance in that result, as opposed to finding the word Shakespeare anywhere in the full text document. So it's a way to find what you want and be a little more precise. The document text search is kind of the opposite of that. It will look inside the body of text of the document only, not in the title, in the metadata, and things like that, if that makes sense.
Great. Yeah. That certainly clarifies my confusion. So we've got a question from Beth again, who says, another quick question. Do you publish images in color, which might be important for fields like geology?
Yes, absolutely. Everything now that is published is in color. However we receive it from the university for the quote-unquote born digital content that everybody now provides, we take that. And as well as when we digitize or receive digitized older copies, we also have full color. So the screen captures that I showed and the graphics that I showed earlier in the publication were actually taken from Dissertations. And go back a little bit further, so you will see, for example, here, these two graphs were taken out of Dissertations in their full color way that they're displayed.
Great. So we have a question here. We have a question here from Randy, who asks, for approximately half of the citations in here, you don't have full text. Is this mainly because those are older works? Are they embargoed somehow? What is the breakdown for the citations?
That's a great question. So as I mentioned, we've got about 5 million titles total, and half are full text and half are citations. Most of that is because they are older works. As we mentioned, they go back into the 1600s. So those, of course, very, very, very few of those older dissertations are been scanned into full text. So we have a lot of older ones. We have some that are linked out to a national repository in a few cases, like Ethos, and we have some that are embargoed. It's not a huge amount, and that's really based on the policies of each university and what they've established and agreed upon with the author. And then we occasionally get a request from an individual author to embargo or take down their work from the database, which we of course honor. So yeah, it's mostly due to the age of the content and sometimes the location. Like, for example, we recently brought about 270,000 citations from China into the database a couple of years ago, and that's just part of a process in our relationship with Chinese universities as we get their citations in, and then moving down the line hopefully to bring in full text.
Okay, great. So a follow-on sort of to that is, have you had an increase or decline in embargoes recently? Have you noticed anything regarding that?
That's a good question, and I'll double check on that, but I don't think we have actually. It's a pretty steady amount, again, it's small. We find in some fields such as creative writing or maybe history, there's a higher amount of requests, or in fields that maybe have to do with research for national security, things like that. But it's a pretty steady amount.
Okay, great. And a question sort of about usage. Do you find that researchers are using the older digitized dissertations?
They do. Of course, the newer titles get the most use, but we have found, compared to before they were digitized, of course, they get a huge amount of additional use. We have endless examples. We have a dissertation that I think it was from the University of Aberdeen, perhaps. It was a dissertation written in the 1930s, and I think it was about Aristotle. It was still on the shelf in the library in the stacks, and I think it had been checked out 3 times in the past, 80 years.
Wow.
They did a digitization. It got into PQDT Global, and then they had, I think, 30 downloads of it in just a couple of years. So yeah, when something gets digitized, even if it's old, even if it's on an obscure topic, it will see use. And we do find every month we do a survey of the most downloaded dissertations and the most downloaded master's theses from the database, and we do find that almost every month there's something that is older and has been digitized that is getting that high level of use.
Cool, great. So a question here sort of about the individual theses. Joan asks, is an individual thesis available for purchase to an instructor, or does that have to be requested by a library? How does that work?
Individuals can purchase copies. If your library doesn't have a subscription, or you want to purchase it for some other reason, you can. And there's different formats available. There's a PDF format and some different printed formats that you can get.
Okay, great. So we have a question here from Kim who asks, how many author-supplied key terms can be assigned to a dissertation, and how do you search for those?
I will have to check. I don't know if we have a limit. When someone submits the dissertation or thesis to the database, they have a list of subject categories that we have that they can choose from. And I know that they can choose multiple ones. And I am going to look very quickly here about choosing the author's key terms. And that's a great question. I'm going to have to take that one offline and double check.
Sure.
Thank
Absolutely. You're welcome. We have a question here from Alexis who asks, are there any specific issues that you face with art history dissertations or theses? And maybe we could broaden that to, are there specific disciplines that have different sort of levels of difficulty in being digitized or that sort of thing?
I think that from the digitization perspective, it's really what's available, from the university and from the source. We can accept any kind of file pretty much as long as there's a PDF that has the summary information. So, if it can be digitized, then we can accept it. So I know that universities have varying levels of accessibility to the stuff for scanning art history, for or fine arts projects and things like that. So that's really something that is happening more and more, and of course as the technology gets better. From a copyright perspective, there are no issues. It's just that people need to follow what their policies are. As far as third-party copyright, we just ask people to do what they should, as far as acknowledging any third-party copyrighted works that are in the dissertation, and that's something that's handled between the university and the student.
Excellent. So, do you have any insight into, we've got another question here, into what are the most frequently searched for and downloaded
Mhm.
subjects?
Yeah, by looking at some of our trends in the most accessed ones that we look at each month, we have seen some things in the last year or two. We get a lot of trending research for education and education topics. That is a lot of advanced degrees awarded in those fields, and then we have a lot of dissertations and theses in that. There's also business ones, business management.
Mm.
There have been increasing numbers of most accessed titles that deal with social media and the impact on students, the impact on businesses, things like that. Um, and then if there is we sometimes see a spike in things around the time of Nobel Prizes being awarded or things like that. So those are some of the trends that we've seen.
Great. And we've had a question here from David who asks, are there statistics on how many dissertations are included from each of the each of the participating countries?
Yes. We do have that data, and I can say that from the historical perspective, as far as the entire corpus of the database, it did start in the U.S., so about half the content is from the U.S. The next largest contributor is Canada, with the UK close behind. And then we have a growing number from China, India. Um, those are two of the other top contributing schools. We have quite a few from Germany and some from the Scandinavian countries. Those are where a lot of the top volume comes from the historical perspective. And it follows that pretty closely for what we get for new content, though we're getting more and more all the time from countries from all over the world.
Okay, great, great. Let's see here. What else have we got? So you mentioned earlier, I think that that there isn't a compatibility problem between having a dissertation in this database versus an institutional repository. Is that the case? And could you talk a little bit more about that, if there's anything more to say?
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. I mentioned that a little bit. We work, of course, with many institutional partners, and many of them have their own institutional repositories or participate in a regional database or a national library database. And we are completely compatible with that. They can take the dissertations and theses and, of course, put them wherever they need to. And we feel, the more places, the better for the university and for the authors. They're going to have access to as many people as possible, as many researchers in as many places, and get as much exposure. So yeah, absolutely. We have a lot of dissertations that are available in institutional repositories. And then, the researchers are going to find they can access all kinds of info without having to go to individual institutional repositories to find it.
Yep.
And then when we do digitization, we work with a lot of schools on helping them digitize their older dissertations. And when we convert those printed copies into PDFs, we very frequently, the universities use that to populate their own repositories as well as put those
Mm.
digitizations into PQDT Global.
Great. Great. So we've got another question here from Kimberly about copyright, and I think it's sort
Yes.
of coming at it from the other side. Kimberly says, the question of copyright, can the authors turn their dissertation into published works in books and journals? What copyright, if any, does ProQuest own of the dissertations?
Right. We do not own copyright. The copyright resides with the author. So this is just for our own use as this single instance of dissemination. So as far as taking that dissertation and using it as the basis for some kind of future publication, like a monograph or an article, that's really up to the publisher. And we have found that, since publishers by and large want something that's different and has, a marked difference from what was in the dissertation, that it's not a problem. And obviously we don't have the copyright. The copyright lives with the author, so they retain it and can do, what they want to do with it. We do also have a situation now in some other STEM fields in particular where the dissertation requirements from the university are that the student have published articles as the chapters of their dissertations. And so, kind of in a backwards compatible way, we support that also and include that.
Great. And we've got sort of a question about content that comes from Bernadette, who simply asks, does your database include law journals and articles and those sorts of things?
This particular database, PQDT Global, is just dissertations and theses that are published as part of fulfilling the requirements for the degree. ProQuest has a vast amount of other databases and other content with academic journals, some law journals, government documents, things like that.
And so maybe to point that a little more towards the dissertations, are there law dissertations and those sorts of things in here as well?
Yes, there are. I know it can be a little bit different for law schools and medical schools and things like that, but we do have those schools participating in the database, and so we do get dissertations from those fields.
Okay, great. Let's see, we've got a few more questions here. Mariette asks, is a university able to obtain statistics on the usage of dissertations from their libraries?
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
At ProQuest, there are some different avenues available for the libraries in getting usage statistics on the content that they have subscriptions to from ProQuest, including this database.
Okay.
And one thing that's interesting that we do find when we're looking at overall dissertations as a content type within ProQuest, it is one of the most used and most downloaded types of content within our own body of content that we offer.
Okay, great. We have a question here from Brian who asks, has ProQuest considered linkouts from dissertations to published versions of the research, perhaps to journals or to preprints or that sort of thing?
In a roundabout way, we do have that available. For example, when I was looking at the example for the sciences dissertation, you can search on the author and that author's dissertation, as well as any other articles that the person has published, will be linked to if it's available through ProQuest. And then in the references, it's not necessarily a direct link right out to the published stuff, but there are those reference links. And then we also have ORCID ID links if it's available in the metadata. So if we have the ORCID ID of the author, you can look at that also and find their other publications. Great.
So we've got a question here from David who says, and David asks, the keyword approach is good for searching for very specific topics, but other than searching the abstract and title, are there ways to make the search more specific?
Yes, you can search on the subject categories, which ProQuest uses for all of the major subject headings. You can do a specific index term search, so you can come at it from that way to further narrow it down. You can use different, Boolean language to further refine your search. There are lots of ways that you can do that and get more specific with it.
Okay, great. All right, and I would encourage folks, if you do have additional questions, we've taken a great many of them. That's all of them that I see in the queue. but we'll give you a minute or two here. If you do have additional questions, to drop them into the Q&A module. And we'll just give you a couple more seconds here. All right, let me take a look there. If folks wanted to reach you, Teresa, is there a way that they could do that?
Yes, they can always email me at teresa.levesque@proquest.com. And on the last slide here, if you have any questions at all about dissertations, we have an email address. It's dispub@proquest.com. And that's also on the last slide. But yes, please get in touch with me, get in touch with us for any questions that we could answer.
Okay, great. Oh, we've got it looks like there's one more question here from Lynette, and it says, Lynette's wondering if she can use the info on the slide with use dissertations. She'd like to borrow it and modify for use with a grad student. Would that be okay?
Yes, if you could get in touch with me or Lynette, if it would be okay, to send me an email, and we can get that information to you.
Okay, great. Great. All right, and it looks like that is the last question. I'm not seeing a great many more pop up here, so I will say thank you very much for taking the time to present today, Teresa. I think it's been really great, and you've dealt with a great number of questions. So.
That's good. I like having questions. It's good to have questions, and thank you very much to everyone for attending and asking questions.
Absolutely. Thank you again, everybody out there. I would just remind you before you take off, we did record the program today, so look for that follow-up email from ACRLN Choice with a link to the recording. And you should also see a link in your chat box to a brief 6-question survey. If you could take a minute to fill that out before going on your way today, that would be very useful. It lets us know how we did, and we very much appreciate your taking the time to do so. So thanks again to everybody out there for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the session, and I hope the rest of your day is great.